I'm joined in this part of the programme by Steve Reid, the Environment Secretary, Richard Fuller, who is the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and Joe Pike, our political correspondent. So, first of all, Chris Philp, as the Shadow Home Secretary, I suppose not a huge surprise that he decided to quiz Angela Rayner about really that report from Baroness Louise Casey earlier in the week about grooming gangs. What did you make of his approach?
Well, I suppose by jumping on that issue again after the response of Kemi Badenoch in the Commons on Monday, yesterday she chaired this news conference with survivors and the families of survivors. We've now got day 3 of the Conservatives focusing on something that they clearly see as a weakness for the Labour Party. A different tone from Chris Philp, at least at the start, compared to the sort of more aggressive approach of Kemi Badenoch on Monday. Well, that tone didn't last. But really interesting that the Tories are continuing, Vicky, to zero in on this issue of the language Keir Starmer and some of the Labour politicians were using in January, questioning really the motives of people calling for a national inquiry. They clearly see this as a sort of awkwardness, especially when there's been a U-turn on that sort of key central issue. And also, he managed to pivot to a different issue where the Conservatives clearly see a weakness, and which, as the Prime Minister and Number 10 have said, on small boats, the situation in the Channel's deteriorating.
Well, a lot of that focus, as you say, was on these words from Sir Keir Starmer back in January. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
What I won't tolerate is politicians jumping on the bandwagon simply to get attention, when those politicians sat in government for 14 long years, tweeting, talking, but not doing anything about it. Now so desperate for attention that they're amplifying what the far right is saying.
So, Steve, do you think that the Prime Minister should apologise for saying that? Those words, do they feel a bit awkward now?
I don't think they do. I mean, the Prime Minister has been, it was clear there, I thought, too. He was talking about politicians who had done nothing in government for 14 years to tackle this problem and then jumped on it in opposition. And I think that does call into question their credibility on what they were doing. Now, I thought, just having watched PMQ's, Prime Minister's questions just then, I think it was very good that the tone was much more moderated, because this is far too important an issue to dial up the tone and play party politics around it. There is nothing that can be more important to any of us in our society than the protection of children. So I think where we've got to is a very good place. We had some victims of these horrific crimes saying they wanted local inquiries, some saying they wanted national inquiries. Louise Casey was asked to produce a report. She's got immense credibility in this area, having commissioned and written the report into Rotherham over a decade ago, making actually many recommendations that were never implemented and should have done. But her conclusion was that we need that national inquiry so that we have the power to compel witnesses to come forwards and give their evidence to expose what went wrong, so we can take steps and make sure it never happens again.
But just going back to Sir Keir Starmer's words there, we had Rachel Maskell, one of your MPs, on the programme yesterday, and she said that she thought that Sir Keir Starmer's comments were wrong. And there are some people who think that he, by saying that this was a far-right bandwagon, himself overlooked the importance of this.
Well, I'm very sorry to disagree with Rachel. I respect her, much of the work that she leads. But it was clear to me watching that the Prime Minister was talking about politicians who could have done, Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, was the Minister for Children and didn't do this. Chris Philp, who we just saw at the dispatch box, was at the heart of the Home Office, didn't do anything. And yet when they're in opposition, they call for something. Now, it does seem strange not to do it in government. I think the key point, though, isn't who said what and when. It's the fact that we are having this inquiry. It will be a national inquiry. It will have the power to compel witnesses to come forward so we can expose what went on, root and branch, understand what the real drivers were behind this. We don't just want this to be about words. The government's already got the National Crime Agency conducting a national operation now to go after these gangs, to arrest the people responsible, prosecute them and get them behind bars. We need to do those two things together. This should never, ever have happened in the way that it did. And I think it was right, actually, that the Home Secretary yesterday issued an apology on behalf of the British state over many years for the way that these primarily young girls have been let down.
So, Richard, Kemi Badenoch when she was in power, the accusation there is that she didn't do enough and she only really came to this issue when she's been in opposition.
So, I mean, first of all, the most important thing is that the families and the people who are in the Senate should be the focus of attention. And that's why I think it's right for the Conservative Party and Kemi Badenoch to talk about this for the last 3 days, as you were saying, because one of the points here is that these voices were not heard, they were ignored for so long. So I don't think there's anything wrong with continuing to talk about it. And I'd have to say, I have a different view to Steve on the Prime Minister's words. I think the Prime Minister was wrong in using those words about the grooming gangs. And the reason, I think, is that the grooming gang scandal and the ethnic compartment of that sits atop as the most extreme and horrendous end of a political culture, political acceptance, political consensus that said it's okay to judge different people in our communities based on the values of those communities. And so you could treat people slightly different ways because of a Pakistani origin, or they may be of Indian origin, or they may be of European origin. And I think politicians need to start thinking about what the overall consensus of the British values are. And I think when the Prime Minister says that when you get at it because of trying to point certain communities and talks about it being the far right, he's missing a point. That underlying this, all politicians of all persuasions need to accept that there has to be a standard British norm that we have expectations of in our culture, in our legal system, and in our politics.
Do you think that's right?
Well, I think that is right. I mean,
Was there squeamishness? Were people covering this up?
Was, and we know that
some
from the Rotherham review that Louise Casey did over a decade ago. Keir Starmer, actually, when he was, he's Prime Minister now, but he was Director of Public Prosecutions then, and he led the first prosecution of a criminal gang for his.
But do you think some Labour politicians were worried about community relations, and that's why they didn't talk about the fact that some of these gangs were of Pakistani heritage?
That is what was going on. It wasn't restricted to the Labour Party. It went wider than that. There were many people in public service who should have prioritised the safety of those children, not a misguided.
But it is just astonishing that didn't happen. It's astonishing. It wasn't just isolated cases. We're talking about thousands
of town after town.
Children.
Absolutely. But we had that review, remember, from Louise Casey a decade ago. And it laid out actions that should have been implemented but were not over a decade.
So that is the problem. There was a review. You, as the Conservative government, set up a review by Professor Alexis Jay. It took 7 years to complete. It was broad. It was looking at lots of institutions. But then you didn't implement the recommendations. Look at this headline here in The Independent. Child Sex Abuse Inquiry Chair slams the government's disappointing response to recommendations. That's from 2023.
Yeah, and look, I think this is... We are sort of, even though we may disagree on what the Prime Minister said, the fundamental point here is that this experience, this horrendous series of things, which you rightly said was widespread in different areas, goes to a core part of how politics has been acting in this country for a long period of time, which is that there was a willingness or a blind eye pass to where different communities were running by different rules. And in the most horrendous extent, that got into the grooming gangs and other things, and the people who should have been able to say, this is completely wrong, somehow thought that there was some cultural difference, some cultural acceptance, said, I can't go there, or I don't want to go there. Yeah. And why the Prime Minister, and I don't want to criticise him too much, but why I got that comment, but he doesn't get it. He thinks that's far right. No, it's not. This has to become the new way.
But you're also accepting that under your government, not enough was done.
I think any politician who has been in office for the last 10, 15 years going through it, they'll have done their bit along the way, and I don't want to criticise people in those particular circumstances, but you reach a point where you get this sort of breakthrough moment, and we perhaps are at that now, and now's the time to capture that, and as Steve says, do it across parties to do it, and as Kemi Badenoch has said day after day, putting families at the centre of that.
But not just the perpetrators, but many of the victims themselves were criminalised. We had some children who had been raped that were then prosecuted for their part in their own abuse. Absolutely shocking that could have gone on.
Now, the other issue that Chris Philp decided to raise at Prime Minister's Questions was small boats. French police are struggling to halt a potentially record-breaking surge of people from reaching the UK in small boats, organised by a growing network of smuggling gangs. Downing Street said on Tuesday that the situation was deteriorating. And Joe, the French authorities are, we think, planning a change in the law to intercept some of these boats.
A change to maritime regulations, we think, because at the moment they do not intercept boats in the water. That's sort of one challenge, and we think that is going to change, and there'll be specially trained officers who can intercept boats up to 300 metres away from the shore. That's something we're expecting to be formally unveiled when Emmanuel Macron comes to the UK in about 3 weeks' time as part of a state visit. The second problem, it's a problem we've seen on our TV screens a lot in recent weeks, is that the French police on the beaches don't intervene when people are in the water. So you see these pictures of
We've
migrants.
got some. We've actually got
Waving,
some pictures.
right?
Yeah, so here is our Paris correspondent, Andrew Harding, who was reporting from the south of Calais.
So here we are, the migrants standing in the water where the police here cannot go. They say they're not allowed to enter the water. And there's a boat, a taxi boat, that's come along the coast and is now trying to pick up more of them. So the group of migrants here waiting to see if they can also get on board the boat here. And further out to sea, another group of migrants who are also trying to clamber on board. And behind me on the coast, on the shore, maybe 20 policemen standing there watching, not intervening because they say the rules that they have prevent them from going into the water, except if they're going to rescue somebody who's drowning.
So that's the report there from our colleague Andrew Harding. I mean, there's not much evidence there of gangs being smashed, is there?
Well,
They're adapting their technique, aren't they?
Those pictures there, those images show us that there are problems with the system if the French police can't go in to the shallow water.
We're paying them millions of pounds, aren't we, the French police?
Getting onto those boats. But within a few weeks, we have a British-French summit here in London, and immigration will be right at the top of the agenda. We have a much better relationship now with the French than we did under the previous government. That's important because we need collaboration to resolve what is happening in the English Channel, but we also need wider collaboration to deal with the gangs who are the root cause of those individuals ending up at the beach in Calais and all getting into these very identical looking boats to cross the channel. You have to smash the whole system. We've brought in new counter-terrorism powers already to start doing that. We've already removed, I think 30,000 people have been removed from the country, people who had no right to be here. That's a 12% increase, and in the first 3 months of the year, 6,000 fewer people are in hotels. So there's progress. I recognise it's nowhere near enough.
But it looks like the smugglers they're adapting their techniques, aren't they? So they are the taxi boats, they call this. They launch from different places. They're evading the French police, and then they're literally picking.
Well, one of the interesting reasons why they're doing that is because the work to break the supply chains means that they can't get the boats that they would use once and then throw away.
And do you think there's been progress there in terms of that?
It shows you that there is starting to be. It's nothing like enough. I'm not going to pretend it's enough when we've still got so many people coming across. But the fact that we are seeing the impact of some disruption shows it's starting to work. The fact that we are removing more people from the country who have no right to be here shows it's starting to work. And the fact that we're going to have a large swathe of the entire French government here in London in a few weeks' time to sit down with the British cabinet and talk about immigration and how we tackle it shows the strength of relationships that we need to resolve this issue of...
You say there's a better relationship, but numbers are up by a lot, 45%.
But they're going to be here, and we're going to be able to sit down and talk about what further changes.
It's not working, though, is it? You've had it a year.
I heard Joe just a moment ago speculating about one of the changes that may come out of those conversations. If you can't speak, you can't change things. The fact that we can engage with them is going to mean that we can start to resolve some of these problems. But I pointed as well to some of the areas where we have seen progress, such as the 12% increase in the removal of people who have no right to be here.
So, Richard, why didn't you remove more people? You know, the Labour have been in power for a year, and they say they've managed to increase the numbers of removals.
So
you talked tough on this, but actually you didn't deliver it.
Well, there are removals and there are people coming in, and I think on removals that there have been issues about the process for removals. Just saying yes more quickly to people isn't a way of clearing it. It's just saying yes to people more quickly, and I think there may be some of that going on in the way in which numbers are being processed at the moment, some shortcutting in that processing. There's no evidence that there have been greater application of different technology to do it, or different insights, or different rules about it. But on the crossings, the other points you were talking with Steve about, you know, Labour's strategy of like smashing has sort of three major problems. Number one, the numbers of crossings are up, not down. Number two, as your video showed and your questions indicated, the people running these taxi boats, doing these crossings, are entrepreneurs. They're in it to make a buck. They want to make some money. And, it's a pretty long coastline. People have all got phones. It's going to be very easy, whatever the French do. And I'm pleased the French have changed their law. But the third problem is Labour got rid of the one thing which was a clear deterrent, never got fully enacted, which was offshore processing, in our case in Rwanda, stopping people ever having the chance to come into this country through these routes. They'd be taken
But we
to a
never
third
found out
country.
if it would be a deterrent, did we?
Well,
Because it never got started.
No, that's fair. There was some sort of anecdotal evidence that people in Ireland were saying blah, 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 but I don't want too much credit. But it is a deterrent. If you know that you get to the country, then we are going, once you get found, you've got to apply, you're going to go somewhere else.
Steve?
Don't you have a chance to do it.
It was a gimmick designed to try and get the Conservatives through an election, which ultimately they lost anyway. They spent around £700 million of British taxpayers' money to remove 4 people who were all volunteers, and it made no impact in the long term.
Do you think that we have there are reports? So lots of journalists have been to Calais and spoken to those who are trying to get across the Channel, and one of the things they do talk about a lot is the fact that they feel they can come to Britain and work. They can work.
Well,
They don't need to show ID. They can work in the black economy, and that's the big draw.
The fact that we are removing more people than ever before, 30,000, that's a 12% increase on a year ago, should make those people think twice, because whereas before they could come here and have a higher chance
But we've just seen them all piling into those boats. It's not stopping them.
There is now a higher chance they will be apprehended and sent back if they have no right.
I think the odds are still quite good that they would get to stay, though, aren't they? Even on those figures.
We're increasing the number of people that are being removed from the country. We're giving new counter-terrorism powers to border security and the police to crack down on the individuals that are coming across, but also the gang masters that are ferrying them across the sea as well. We need to do more, and we can sit down with the French in a few weeks' time and talk about what further changes there need to be to ensure that people are stopped and apprehended before they even get into the water.
Okay, let's have a look now at this BBC headline. HS2 to be delayed again with no new date given. So it's going beyond the target date of 2033. So then we don't think today we're even going to know when that high-speed railway line will begin operating. But Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, is expected to tell Parliament that there is no reasonable way to deliver the line on schedule and within budget. I mean, this has been a long-running saga, hasn't it?
It's supposed to open next year.
It's incredible because when it was announced, we were like, oh, 2026.
2026.
That's a long time
and
away.
It cost 33 billion. We're now looking at over 100 billion. So it's obviously ballooned. And I think this is Heidi Alexander trying to make it
She's actually making the statement right now. We can just see
lower
it has
expectations, really.
Yeah.
Try and pause it as much as possible and publish these 2 reviews, which seem pretty damning about the contracts and the management, including plans for Euston Station that were very detailed and expensive, and then were scrapped.
So, I mean, this is an utter failure, isn't it?
It's a terrible project.
Why has it
Awful
gone so
project.
wrong?
Well, there's been lots of effort, and it's a very interesting question. There are lots of levels to this. But first of all, just for my own, I wish Heidi Alexander all the best, because we want that project to be delivered. We want it to end up in a way that delivers what it was originally supposed to do. But going back all the way to 2011, the original prospectus for this railway was delivered in the right high-speed rail, did not sound sensible, between Birmingham and London, because it was a few minutes saved off your journey. It was a more capacity line that was needed, so it was sold on the wrong premise. Then it seems that there were, and I think it was in a public accounts committee, there were 2 sets of figures being presented within HS2, one and the actual figures, another set for public. There's some evidence that Ms. Alexander has talked about, that perhaps there's fraud that was going on within HS2. So there are lots, and then political decision-making. So under Mark Harper, they started the efforts to try and get to grips. There's been these 2 reviews, I haven't seen them yet. So I think at all levels, this project has been a major problem. And I'd just say one other thing. There's a very good piece of work, I don't know if I can name the consulting firm, but by a consulting firm, that looks about 2,400 construction projects around the world, including in the UK. And it does pinpoint that in the UK, railway projects are a particularly difficult problem for us in terms of getting them delivered on time and getting them on cost. And I would hope that Ms. Alexander will broaden her research, really to take advantage of that, what that consulting firm has found out.
I mean, one estimate is it could now cost over £100 billion. I mean, how do we We talked earlier about learning lessons from things. I mean, how do we make sure that this just isn't repeated? This notion of, which lots of people I think is that we just can't build stuff on budget and on time.
It is an example of the most appalling mismanagement, poor contract management, poor financial controls. We had the £100 million bat tunnel as well, if you remember, all of that money wasted on a tunnel that never had needed to be built for bats. So what the government is doing, and what Heidi Alexander is saying right now in the chamber, we can see her on the big screen in front here, is looking at the lessons that have been learned from that, and how we can take a project that ran entirely out of control, get a grip on it, and set out what a realistic and affordable plan will be for this into the future. We need to know that for this particular project, but there are lessons to learn from the absolute catalogue of failure around this that need to be applied for other public procurements and other major projects.
Richard, do you want to come out there?
So just because Steve mentioned it, 100 million on a bat tunnel. When someone hears that, like, what the? I mean, why at that point did not just no, stop. And the reason
will you be able to stop that kind of?
The issue is the political
we have,
cover
on that one.
But the political, but the interesting thing, Steve, is from both parties, everyone wanted this railway. I mean, where's the mayor of Birmingham, the mayor of Manchester, mayor of Liverpool, the Conservative government, the opposite. Everyone, there's so much political cover for this. It was almost like the project that couldn't be touched.
But I don't think the project was misconceived. It was mismanaged. What happened. The costs ran out of control because the previous government didn't grip them. We can't let that happen again. On the bat tunnel, actually, we are streamlining the environmental regulations so that projects can go ahead much faster and at much lower cost. We could have spent that money protecting far more of our wildlife.
That's a good thing.
So bat tunnels are going.
Sorry?
No more bat tunnels.
Well, they should have routed the track somewhere else, so it was never necessary to build it.
I've got one very quick question. Farmers are calling for UK animal welfare rules to be upheld in Gulf states deal. This is a trade deal with Gulf states that farmers are very worried could mean low welfare meat being imported. This is your area, so I just wanted to ask you about it.
Well, I agree with what they're saying. You know, we've signed a deal with the EU, with the US, and with India, where we have maintained UK standards. I thought it was wrong when the previous government undercut the standards that we expect British farmers to uphold. If you then undercut that in trade deals, you're really just exporting the problem.
But can you guarantee to farmers that there won't be, they're particularly worried, I think, about chicken, about the import of chicken, about the lower welfare standards?
Well, the deal hasn't been done yet, but we've been very clear we will uphold UK standards.
But you can guarantee that even with this, the Gulf states.
And you can look at the other three trade deals we've done. It's always been upheld.
There we go. We have a guarantee, not just on bat tunnels, but on welfare standards with imports as well. Thank you very much indeed. That's all for today. Thank you to all my guests. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Please join me then, and thank you for watching.